So to frame this whole conversation, I like this quote by Charles Darwin, who you all know is kind of the father of evolution. And I really like the last part of it, which talks about that the vigorous, the healthy, and the happy survive and multiply, right? And the survival of the fittest, it's those who are happy that survive and multiply. And so with this, we can build on the house of happiness, which is a very simple framework I use to kind of describe how mindfulness fits within the rest of wellness, right? So mindfulness and sleep are sort of the foundations of your house, and then movement like exercise and nutrition are the pillars that build happiness. And then of course, once you get these down, there's like social activities and all the other things that come into play. But if you can get these foundations down, especially mindfulness, then you'll be able to build your house of happiness, which is different for every person. And so, quick question. Who here meditates or has meditated before? Okay, so what does meditation mean to you? So John Kabat-ZANN, who works at UMass, I think sums up mindfulness really well when he says mindfulness is awareness that arises from paying attention in the present moment, non-judgmentally, right? And at the end of the day, it's just coming back to the present moment. And there's this ancient Tibetan saying that says, short moments, many times. Because we all get distracted by the wandering mind and the monkey mind just because it's hard to be a human, and just sometimes we get distracted. So why meditate? If you meditate, why do you do it? And so I think there's two key reasons to meditate, and it differentiates from the science of objects, which is the science you're familiar with, such as physics, chemistry, and biology, and then the science of the first person, which are things that have zero measure and you can't measure, like your idea space, which is a mental model for your mind. And so we'll start off why meditation is important for the science of objects, and then move into why it's important from the science of the first person. So your body communicates itself via neurons. You've probably seen this image way too many times in your day. And then your neurons kind of combine together to build your nervous system, right? And you have your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight or your rest and digest. When you're in your rest and digest or parasympathetic, your heart rate slows down. It's more of like controlled, and you're just calm. And if you're doing like a physical activity, you want to be in your sympathetic nervous system, right? Kind of your heart rate goes up, more blood flow. And the crazy thing about all this is a lot of this is subconscious, right? You can't just like sit there and be like, all right, heart rate increase. All right, that's not going to work. And so one of the key tools that we have to control this is your breath. Simple as just slow inhales and exhales to practice like parasympathetic nervous system. And if you try to breathe in a little bit faster, breathe in, exhale through your mouth, then you get to activate your sympathetic nervous system. So that's kind of like the first reason why mindfulness is important from the science of objects. It helps regulate your autonomous nervous system. The second, which I think is the most important one, is that mindfulness decreases activity in the default mode network. So the default mode network is a series of neural pathways that light up when you're mind wandering, right? And Killingsworth and Gilbert at Harvard showed that when you are mind wandering, you tend to be unhappy. And I can attest to this. When I'm thinking about the inaccessible past or the imaginary future, it's usually not the most pleasant thoughts or just random things I worry about in life. And so Judson Brewer at Brown University showed that practicing meditation decreases activity in the default mode network. So in a way, by practicing mindfulness, you get to be a little bit happier, which is always nice. But the dilemma with a lot of studying the mind is that it's non-trivial. It's pretty hard to study the brain and how it all works. And so in order to study it in a different lens, we need to develop a new science and a new lexicon to describe the mind, which is the science of the first person and the idea space. And one of the meditation gurus named Munindraji had a really good quote, and it's, if you want to understand your mind, sit down and observe it. Pretty simple, right? But as they say in The Little Prince, which is a famous French book, it's much harder to judge oneself than it is to judge others, right? So how do you detach from your thoughts? How do you detach from your emotions and look at them the same way as you would look stars and atoms and molecules? And that's the key to the idea space. So from the science of the first person, meditation and mindfulness allows you to view different aspects of your idea space or your mind, right? So on the left, you have without meditation, your mind wandering. On the right, you have these koans that show up. And these koans are like the identity of an idea space. They're like a quote, a song, or anything else that captures a pure moment in space and time. Furthermore, meditation helps you become aware of your hedonic adaptation, which is just a human tendency to get used to things, right? When you're happy, you get really happy for a second, and like, let's say you reach a milestone, and then the next day you're like, well, my day sucks now. For no reason. The human mind is weird. And it's my belief that the happiness baseline also increases and decreases over time, but you can't really be aware of it, right? It's similar to this concept in math called the devil's staircase, which is an object that is locally flat, but has global curvature. So it's like if I walked in a straight line and then looked back after 20 steps, I actually climbed 20 steps instead of just walking in a straight line. And space-time works in a similar way to this, and I think the happiness baseline also happens like this. Like when you get really happy, you go up, but then you get used to it. But if you take a step back and look at it from a different vantage point, you see that, okay, my level of happiness actually went up. The last reason why I'm practicing mindfulness and meditation is important from the science of objects is because it helps you get into flow, right? Flow is a concept introduced by Mihaly, someone whose last name is the most complicated last name I've ever heard in my life, so I'm not going to butcher it. But essentially, flow is when there's a task that you're performing that has a high level of perceived challenge and a high skill level, right? It's when you're just in your element, you're in your flow. And flow is important because it's one-pointed concentration, or samadhi. And that's really nice because in life, your idea space is going to go through different ups and downs or different colors of emotions, right? And so flow helps you stay on track, helps you stay with those koans, helps you stay with your identities so that you can push through any task that you're given. So now, a really hard question. What is consciousness? What does it mean to you? To me, consciousness is just the light that you shine onto an idea space. And again, what is an idea space? We've been talking about it this whole time, but I never actually talked about what it is. So I think an idea space is a mental model for your mind that's congruent with modern physics. It consists of your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and perceptions, and it's best explained through a little short story. So picture yourself at night on the beach, drinking a pina colada, having a great time, and the sun is setting, and the golden rays are shining right off the water, right towards you, and you're just walking, you're like, damn, these sun's golden rays are shining right towards me, and it's beautiful. And you tell that to your friend, and then your friend looks at you and he says, no, you idiot, the sun's golden rays are pointing right off the water towards me. Right? So the sun can set simultaneously on two people. And why does that happen? And this can be explained through something called the sunset conjecture. And the sunset conjecture is twofold. The first part, everybody lives at the center of their own observable universe. Your observable universe is a giant sphere centered on you where everything you see is in the past. Why is everything you see is in the past? It's because it takes time for light to go from point A to point B, even if it travels at 186,000 miles per second. So for instance, the light that you see from the sun took 8 minutes to reach you. So you're seeing how the sun was 8 minutes ago. It took 20,000 light years for light from the center of the Milky Way galaxy to reach you. So you're seeing how the center of the galaxy was 20,000 years ago, not how it is today. And so you can keep extrapolating this thought process farther back and back, and you get this idea, well, if everything I see is in the past, then what's the edge of my observable universe? What's the farthest that I could see? Well, if everything you see is in the past, then the edge of your observable universe has to be the beginning of time itself, right? The hypothetical Big Bang. And just like a sunset, the effects of the Big Bang are unique to you, right? The gravitational effects of the Big Bang set on you uniquely. So that's kind of the first part of the sunset conjecture. Everybody lives at the center of their own observable universe. And the second part is at the center of your observable universe lives your idea space of uncountable depth and zero measure. So how do you locate your idea space, right? So to locate your idea space, I want everybody to hold something in their hands. Just be whatever you want. Pizza, if you didn't finish it, pen, paper, phone, it's perfect. Clearly, you can see it, right? You can measure it. Other people can see it. Now I want you to close your eyes and picture whatever you're holding in your hand in your head. Do you see a mental image of what you're holding in your hand in your head? Yes. Can anybody else see what's happening in your head, that mental image of what you're holding? No, right? So your idea space has zero measure, right? And because it has zero measure, it looks like nothing to everybody else. So if I took a ruler and I measured 0, I would get 0. If I take a ruler and I measure nothing, I would also get 0. But nothing and 0 are not the same thing. So I can make an object smaller and smaller and so smaller, at which point it vanishes, and it looks like nothing because it has zero measure. As that Martin Rees said, who was a cosmologist, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because something has zero measure and looks like nothing doesn't mean there's nothing there. Something with zero measure can have uncountable depth, which is just a size of infinity that is larger than the infinity that we use to count. And your idea space is a perfect example of such an object that has zero measure and uncountable depth. What does uncountable actually mean? It's a lot. I won't go into it, but at the end of the day, it's synonymous with impermanence, or something that is in a constant state of change. So for example, the universe is impermanent. It is uncountable. It is always changing. For example, our planet is spinning around the equator, which is spinning around the sun, which is spinning around the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy. And then there's dark energy, which is responsible for the constant expansion of space and time at every point in space. It's the same. And so since the universe is uncountable and impermanent, then it's no surprise that your idea space is also uncountable and impermanent. Your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and perceptions are always changing from moment to moment. No two thoughts are the same, just like no two breaths are the same, right? Whatever has the nature to arise has the nature to pass away. And I think this idea of impermanence and uncountability is perfectly summed up by this quote by Heraclitus, which says, "No man steps into the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man." Right? And so coming back to our sunset conjecture, right? Everybody lives at the center of their own observable universe and has a unique perspective of the universe from a butterfly 5 meters away to the edge of your observable universe where the Big Bang started in the beginning of time. And at the center of your observable universe lies your idea space, hidden from the outside world. And in turn, your idea space becomes your object of meditation. And by taking a step back and looking at your idea space in the same way that you would look at your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and perceptions, you can look at them in a very objective lens like you would atoms and chemicals and everything else. Like Albert Einstein said, it is entirely possible that behind the perception of our senses, worlds are hidden of which we are unaware. So that's kind of like the first part of what is an idea space, right? And then the rest of the book just kind of delves into these topics in a little bit more detail. It has 200 plus pictures, which makes it a lot more fun. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check it out. And lastly, let's talk about like why the idea space is important in the first place, right? So the first, like I said, it allows you to view your thoughts objectively, which is great. Let's say you're going to go talk to a patient or something. You don't want the thoughts from the beginning of your day to come in and carry into your conversation with your patient. You want to be able to diagnose your patient in the exact same way you would study a textbook, right? As objectively as possible. So your idea space helps you view your thoughts objectively, which allows you to do that. The second is that the idea space is the trivial solution to Einstein's field equation. I won't touch on this since I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but if you are, hit me up afterwards. Happy to talk about this. But essentially what it does is that it bridges the gap between the humanities and the exact sciences. And for years, people have wondered how the mind relates to the universe at large, and the idea space presents an answer to that. It's not the answer, but it's a mental model we can use to better understand how our mind relates to the universe at large. Then the idea space also introduces a new science for consciousness by describing a new vocabulary to discuss the mind that's congruent with modern physics. In the science of objects, we have rulers, we have sensors, we have semiconductors, we have timers to measure things and get information about the world. When we study the mind, it's not that easy, right? So we need different tools, such as mindfulness, breathing techniques, the headless way, effortless mindfulness. There's so many I could name, Zen, to study the mind. And lastly, the idea space helps you build your own path, right? The book isn't a self-help book in the traditional way, right? There's only one piece of advice in it, but the goal of it is to awaken, right? And awakening means to understand what the world isn't, so you have a better understanding of what the world is, right? By seeing what the world isn't, you can break down your preconceived notions of the world and see the world with a more objective lens, which overall leads to more happiness in life, in my experience. And so returning to your sunset, it's just important to realize that everybody lives in their own headless space at the center of their own observable universe, including patients, patients' families, fellow doctors, nurses, and everybody else around you. So that's it. I tried to keep it pretty brief because I know it's lunchtime and pizza usually takes priority. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And thank you again for your time. So questions? Yes. Yeah, so I did, so after, I'm a nerd. I don't know if you could tell, but I'm a bit of a nerd. So I still do. I wake up every morning and I just read textbooks for fun. So I started with math textbooks and then I moved on to physics textbooks and then I just kept reading textbooks on rockets, semiconductors, and everything. And I did a lot of meditation as well during that time. So I think during one day, the term idea space came to mind. And then I thought, okay, well, how do you apply the principles of math to the mind? And so the idea of like an idea space as a topological space came to be. And then what would the identity of an idea space kind of came into it. And then I just started writing and writing. And my first draft was like 700 pages of terrible, terrible writing. I then just dwindled it down and down and down until something made sense. And then, yeah, it just kind of, like the story wrote itself, which was pretty cool. Yeah. Yep. I haven't read it, but I just love John Kabat-Zann's like being. Just like I've watched a couple of his videos, and I think just the way he approaches mindfulness is very kind of secular and just non-woo-woo. I think that's a big thing against mindfulness nowadays. It's like very woo-woo, and so I think part of this is to try to make it more grounded and more approachable to people, especially in the scientific world, who are very skeptical, to say the least. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, of course. So first question, how to practice mindfulness. There's so many apps out there. I think apps are a great way to start. But if you don't want to use an app, just like sit and just, that quote from Munindraji, if you want to understand your mind, sit down and observe it. Just sit, look what you notice. And the key to mindfulness isn't to have no thoughts, right? The key to mindfulness is to be aware of the arising of thoughts, the passing of thoughts, and both the arising and passing of thoughts, right? So you can do that. I think that's a great way to do it. We make meditation cards on the website, so if you want to check those out, you can. No pressure to do that. And then second question, time where mindfulness was helpful for me. Great question. A lot of times. So I think a big one that's just very recent is the book tour, right? It's kind of stressful driving around places to places, trying to find people, things to do. So just being able to notice when my mind wanders and the spiral of thoughts just takes over, and kind of trying to iteratively backtrack to the thought. Because like the way emotions work is like very complicated, right? You'll have a thought that triggers an emotion, and then the emotion will show up in your body somehow, and you'll just feel stressed. If you don't catch that initial thought, that emotion will just tint your idea space for a long time. And you'll just feel stressed and you don't know why. So the key is like, okay, how do I find that thought that triggered the book tour, or like the stress? So for me, it was like, oh, the book tour is not working. It's like classic thought. And so just being able to backtrack to, okay, what thought that I had to lead to this, to that, to this, to find the initial thought that triggered the emotion, and then that shortens the half-life of the emotion tremendously, and that's really nice. Do you have a third question in there, or is there only two? That was two? Okay, perfect. Any other questions? Yes. Your idea space consists of your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and perceptions, and the null set. So thoughts are just words that appear in your head, pictures that appear in your head, or even songs. Emotions, anything between unpleasant and unpleasant. Your sensations are the classical five: touch, sight, hearing, tasting, and smelling. Perception is your ability to recognize something. For instance, this is a clicker. I know this is a clicker. You know this is a clicker. And then the null set is emptiness. And the best way to think about this, imagine that you have a table and it has a bunch of values, and one of the values is missing, right? You don't know what that value is because there's nothing there, right? It's just empty. And so in your idea space, you can achieve this null set, or the empty space, with something called beginner's mind. And when we do a simple stop meditation like we did at the beginning of this, that's when you're able to kind of, poof, all the thoughts disappear, everything disappears in your mind, and you're allowed to begin with a fresh and new idea space. So those are the elements of your idea space, and there's a more mathy ways to describe it with a topological space, but I will spare you the boredom of that for now. Good question, though. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns, questions, things you hated? Things you liked? No? Yes. Great question. So for me, the idea is clopen, and what that means is that it's both. Like, so that's kind of the asking, like, do we have free will? Yes or no, in a similar way. And so for me, like, we have free will and we don't have free will, right? So Robert Plomin, who's a geneticist, talks about DNA. He says they are dumb molecules who just obey the laws of chemistry. So if quarks are dumb molecules that obey the laws of physics, DNA are dumb molecules that obey the laws of chemistry, cells are dumb molecules that obey the laws of biology, are we not just dumb little humans that obey the laws of physics and the universe? But at the same time, like, we have this ability to shine the light of mindfulness onto our idea space and have choice points in life, right? And if every moment in life is a choice point, then we also have this ability to have free will. So, like, in a way, we do have free will and we don't at the same time. And so within your idea space is able to create the world around you, but at the same time, the external world influences your idea space. So it's clopen, which is open and closed together. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, the best way to de-stress is exercise. I just love exercise. If I could just do that the rest of my life, I would. But it's not practical, so I don't. So I think being mindful of when you need to exercise, when you need to do something that's for yourself, is a great step. And then I think the second biggest thing is not to attach to any sort of outcome or goal. Because as soon as you attach to something, you're bound to suffer, right? Because like we talked about, the world is impermanent. The world is uncountable. It's always changing. And so when you attach to something that is bound to change, you're just going to get hurt when it changes eventually. And that goes for anything in life, right? If there's a specific relationship you have and you want the relationship to be a specific way with your spouse or a friend, the world is going to happen. Things are going to change. And so if you always like want it to be the way that it was, you're just going to be hurt and you're going to be suffering. And so being able to detach from the situation and just saying, okay, let's just return to the present moment, take it day by day, and not becoming the step two, right? Just like staying who you are. I think that's like the best way to not. I think stress is normal in those situations, but just being aware of the stress as it arises and passes is the key then. Yeah. Other questions? People in the back. I see you. Any thoughts over there? No? Yes? Yeah, great question. So the big question is like, what is physics, right? Physics is just math plus observations. And Galileo has a quote where it was like, the great world of nature is described in the mathematical language, right? And so math doesn't really give us anything about the world. It gives us a means to describe it. And so I just kind of extended that philosophical trend to the mind, because for how great modern physics is, it had yet to describe the mind in a way that was sustainable. And so in a way, this is kind of like new physics, because it's taking math and applying it to observations, right? So for here, it was the idea of zero measure, right? Your idea space has zero measure. And we can test it, right? You held something, you saw something in your mind, and no one else can see it, right? It looks like nothing. Of course, there will probably come a day where AI is so good and you can just transfer ideas like Pokemons do TMs. But until we get there, this is where we are. But I think that's the whole point of science, right? Science is a cycle of conjectures and refutations. A conjecture is a hypothesis about how the world works, and then a refutation is a decisive observation that says no. The key to science is you can't prove something to be true. It's impossible. Think about the scientific method. Hypothesis, test, fail to reject, or reject. At no point do you say yes, right? Fail to reject just means you don't have enough information to make a conclusion. And if you have an idea that you fail to reject through various testing, then you get a natural law. But over time, like gravity, like everyone thinks gravity is real, right? Yeah, this gravity is real, but it's not, right? Gravity is an illusion caused by the curvature of space-time. And so the same way the law of attraction was replaced by gravity, but space-time replaced gravity. And so being a human is weird at the end of the day. So that's kind of how that came about. Yeah, good question. Any other questions?